Oscar Piastri wins the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and this time he doesn't have to swap for it. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. I'm sure that's how the classic NASCAR commentary line goes. I've not tweaked it at all. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 543 of Motorsport 101. Glad you can join us as ever for this F1 edition on the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Pleasure for you to be listening to us as usual. And according to a certain stat keeper, Mr. Jason, who does the numbers on these things, this is the 500th time I've introed an episode of Motorsport 101. This is my 500th show.
Congratulations. We're slowly making up like the lost ground from your days working at the mill.
The bookies, yes.
It's like this school project has gotten far too out of control.
Massively. At this point, it's the Rocky Horror Picture Show of podcasts. Yes, this was my 500th. This is my 500th episode, which is wild to even say the least. I didn't have anything prepared for it because it was originally meant to be a couple of weeks ago, but there was confusion about how many episodes I'd actually done. But this is actually my 500th show, so I just wanted to say a huge continued thank you to everyone who's going out of their way to listen to us, inviting us into your homes, and believe in my voice enough that you still want to keep listening to what I have to say about motorsport. So sincere gratitude and thanks as ever for 500 appearances. I'm more concerned about the 43 episodes I wasn't on than the 500 that I have been on. But I will take that in the meantime. So thank you, everybody, sincerely for all your continued support as ever. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Formula One this past week. Also, I love that we got a very active chat as we record this live on Riverside. And our man Ryan Eric King, who I still think I want to say is second or third on the appearance list, is still like, lol, I had the reins. You did, King, and I'm very grateful for I'm very grateful that you did. But joining me to talk Baku as ever is Mr. Cameron Buckley. Hello, Cam.
Hello, everyone. Time passes by, the faces shift, but there is one thing that is guaranteed in Formula One. Charles Leclerc's win to pole ratio getting hurt. Every damn time.
That's the fourth year. That's the fourth year in a row he's qualified on pole in Baku, and he's converted none of them into victories. None. And he's had a car capable of winning at least two of those 4 times. It's actually quite funny how Leclerc's pole to win conversion rate just keeps getting whacked. It's quite funny in a sense. We all know that Charles is better than his record, but it is still amusing to listen to. Also joining me, Mr. RJ O'Connell. How's it going, RJ?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Just chiming on that point. Nobody really cares about Charles Leclerc's win to pole ratio these days, because now there is another ratio that people are talking about, and that's Lando Norris's pole to not leading the first lap ratio, which is very staggering in and of itself. But you can't lose the lead on the opening lap of the race if you catch a yellow flag at the wrong time in a quickly evolving track and miss the cut in Q1.
Whoops. It can happen to anybody. Like, you can always, there's always a chance you can be there when Esteban Ocon loses a wheel on his wagon at the worst and most unfortunate and inconvenient of times. It can happen to the best of us. What can I say? It's unfortunate. But yeah, we'll be talking all about Baku and a tremendous fight all race pretty much between Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc for about 90% of the runtime here. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about McLaren and yet more talk about their team orders shenanigans, because there has been a development in that since then. Also, the late crash heard around the world as Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz decided to play a game of smashy-smashy against the left-hand side wall. Not great, but we'll talk about that, apportion blame like we always do in motorsport circles, and talk about what was actually probably Perez's best weekend of the year until that happened. Whoops. As Jason puts in our chat, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, especially if you're Sergio Perez. Who knew? But all of that and more in the next 45 minutes or so. But places you can find us real quick. We are on youtube.com/motorsport101. We're on facebook.com/motorsport101. You can catch us on Elon Musk's sued business investment at Dre Harrison.
You have any idea how little that narrows it down?
There's plenty.
The one that we know is Twitter.
Yes, formerly, of course. You can follow us at Dre Harrison 101, at cbuckley917, RJ O'Connell, and our podcast page at motorsport_101. You can check all of those details out on our website, motorsport101.com, including the blog section with reviews of this race weekend and IndyCar's season finale at Nashville, which is our next episode coming along very, very soon, later this weekend. As well as, by the time this goes up, part one of my season review of the whole scene. So I'm bringing back an old Dre tradition of long and lengthy breakdowns of individual seasons. It's a fun time, so do check that out. Part one will be out by the time this episode goes out. I just finished it about an hour ago, so that's part of the fun where that's concerned. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon, patreon.com/motorsport101. $5 gets you early access to all of our content. 10 gets you in the supporters club of this Discord server and gives you the ability to listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded. As King, Jason, Edwin as well, all listening in our chat. Thank you very much for listening in and avoiding my brother's cursed F1 manager save. Max Verstappen drives for Alpine on it. Before we get
into talking about this Azerbaijan Grand Prix, I'm not happy with your brother Ryan here. So I understand you love faces, but I was the one that brought over The Rock smacking the goosebumps off of his forearm on the podcast originally. And then months after the fact, your brother, leaning into Team Oscar Piastri, has decided that he wants to co-opt himself.
This is brother Ryan.
You don't fuck with the final boss, bitch.
Listen. Brother Ryan loves his memes, and when he finds a meme format that he likes, he will run it into the ground. You have no idea.
Turn it to dust.
Yeah, he will grind it down into the fine paste, and then make sure it's dust by the time the month is out. That's what he does. He still adores Scott Steiner memes to this day, and he will send them to me. He sends them to me whenever he gets a spare moment. The most recent one was like when he was talking about how he can bench press 575 for starters back during 2003's days of Raw. This is what he does. I love him dearly, but unfortunately I cannot endorse my brother Ryan's.
I think we're all mad at him because his F1 Manager 24 save just generated an alternate universe where Max Verstappen left Red Bull to go to Alpine.
Yeah.
What did they offer him? How did they convince him?
I don't think it was stocks in the company. I don't think it was a majority shareholding. I don't even think it was the opportunity to drive a hypercar at Le Mans. I think they offered him like Prime Minister of France, straight up.
Just the whole thing. Just give him the whole country. I
still ain't leaving Red Bull for that.
I wouldn't
even in their current state.
We couldn't have even offered Italy. No, it had to be France, didn't it? No, there's a bunch of cursed shit on there. Charles Leclerc driving for McLaren, Verstappen for Alpine, Porsche being an 11th team, and then nicking Teo Porcher is like the least egregious part of it.
Antonelli.
Kimi Antonelli.
Sorry. After that deal, it's Teo Porcher.
I wish this was a Discord call so I could kick RJ O'Connell.
I would if the opportunity presented itself. After this, we'll talk about F1 in Baku. God damn, that was so cursed.
Well, the politics of racing in Baku these days are a little bit sketchy, but you gotta admit, This was a fun battle for the win between Charles Leclerc, sitting on his 4th consecutive pole position around the streets of Baku in the land of fire, and Oscar Piastri for McLaren at the front of the field after Lando Norris, presumed championship favorite now with that McLaren rocket ship, was forced to start in 15th after an early Q1 elimination. Several cars moved up in front of him due to penalties. But Charles Leclerc built up a 5-second lead in the opening stance of the race, but a slow outlap on his hard tire opened up the door for Piastri to send it down the inside of turn 1 and take the lead. Leclerc stayed with Piastri for the next 30 laps on this hard tire stint. He tried so many times, but he failed to put a move on for the lead. And as Leclerc fell back, due to his rear tires being cooked, he had to ward off Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz for second place. But then on the penultimate lap, Sainz and Perez turned into each other and crashed on the second straight down into turn 3. Both their races are done. Third place goes to George Russell. And in the end, Oscar Piastri wins straight up. No papaya rule shenanigans. No nothing. Just good-ass racing. Dre, how impressive was that battle for the win?
Oscar Piastri's a cold motherfucker. That's the best way I can describe it. That man is ice cold. Like, I've been full disclosure, I have not been the biggest believer in Oscar Piastri in the last year and a half since he's been in Formula One. I think a lot of people were very, very quick to jump on the wagon with him early on. Understandable, I get it. He tripled up Frecker F3 F2 with a quickness for good reason. You know, the year out at Alpine with rust. I was nervous about what Oscar Piastri could be, and I was always hesitant before giving him his flowers. That was an incredible performance. That was perfect. That was an inch perfect drive from start to finish. Yes, he didn't get flustered when Charles Leclerc pulled away early on that medium tyre stint when he built up a 5 or 6 second lead. Stayed with it. Got a little bit of help from Lando because Lando was running the alternate strategy, going the other way, going from hard to medium, and he pulled a Sergio Perez on Sergio Perez, which basically cleared the way for him on the overcut. But once he got to the back of Charles, I love that in the post-race debrief from the Verstappen podcast, as we like to nickname it, Piastri himself admitted it was 50-50 whether he even made that move stick or not. But he gambled and he got it. And his defensive driving afterwards was perfect. Every time Charles got within 0.6, and the Baku DRSM was probably worth about 0.5, Piastri did just enough to keep Charles off. You know, we never quite drifted over that line from hard defending into potential penalties. And he just stayed so immensely cool under pressure that he basically bullied Charles into cooking his rear tires. And that was his most impressive drive in Formula One to date. This kid is him. This is the first time I've looked at Piastri and I thought, yeah, maybe they've got a point about him being a world champion one day, because if he has a few more drives like that, then we're seeing something quite special, because that was remarkable driving. Really, really impressive.
Geez, we only yelled it from the rooftops basically all the way through last year.
You think there were some people that were just like, you know, hey, we've still yet to see his best, or he still thought, yeah, this guy can't manage a set of tires. That complaint is mostly gone. By the way,
ironically, it's actually swapped around this year now. He hasn't been as good over a single lap, but he's been tremendous in race trim.
Yeah.
Although, don't we know this is just because McLaren's making a legal rear wing, which I know. Like,
for me, it's more like I'm not shocked that McLaren's pushing the boundaries, because that's the game. That's what we do here in Formula One. Mm-hmm. I'm more surprised that the FIA hasn't adjusted any of the testing around it, because it's been a thing for a little bit. Usually they hunt this stuff down pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those things. And look, it's amazing we're saying all this about a guy that's 14-3 down to Lando Norris in qualifying this year. It's amazing that he's fixed that out.
Again, like last year it was the opposite, where he could occasionally get the better of Norris, and then Norris would just blow his doors off in race trim. But that's what you'd kind of expect of Lando compared to someone in their rookie season.
Yeah, and the inside talk from McLaren is that even they're taken aback at how fast Piastri has developed in this McLaren setup. He is, generally speaking, far ahead of the curve that McLaren had him at. And I think that's part of the reason why they've been in such a pickle when it comes to team orders this year, because at this point, the qualifying's not been there, but in terms of race pace and ultimate ability, he's pretty damn close to Lando Norris now. Close enough where if he has a good weekend, he can win in his own right, and that's exactly what he did this weekend.
Well, and you know what, Dre? This would, as JB pointed out in our Discord server after the race, had that safety car been a lap later in Miami, one lap one way or the other, this would probably be a very different championship equation, because the timing of that safety car helped Lando out a bunch and killed Piastri's race.
Yeah.
It was about we estimated it out about a 30-point swing.
Yeah.
It's now a 32-point gap between Piastri and Norris. This is also race. Who's echoing?
I think that was when Cam dropped his headphones real quick. I think he's okay now.
Okay.
Try again.
Let me reset. Yeah, so now it's 32 points between Piastri and Norris. Piastri's closed that gap in crazily. First of all, I feel like, yes, this is the first weekend since McLaren put the phrase papaya rules out into the thought sphere. So I know this is going to be a talking point, but I feel like, the team orders game is such a non-starter considering how far Norris started back on the grid. At that point, he's just got to salvage what he can.
Well, the big controversy, at least on the socials, kind of came before the race when McLaren just don't want to rip the bandage off with team orders, where they're going, oh, well, we'll be biased towards Lando, but Oscar doesn't have to give up race wins, and it's not going to be like a complete favoring of Lando. I'm like, guys, just rip the bandage off.
They half-assed it. This is the thing, right? And it's a talking point because McLaren made it a talking point. Yeah. I need to point this out here. Zach Brown was the one that ethed papaya rules into existence when he was actually asked to explain it. It was literally just common sense. Don't take each other out. Take extra care when it's your teammate and bring your cars home, which is what every team principal tells all of their drivers. They've just put a brand term on it because your car happens to be orange. No, I refuse to call it because it's McLaren. They have to market it. And then we got to Thursday, going into this race weekend for Media Day for Baku, and it was Andrea Stella that put it out there that, we're going to be biased towards Lando for the next couple of weekends, and we're going to see what happens. McLaren were the ones that brought this into existence, not us. And even then, they still couldn't fully commit to the bit by saying we're favouring Lando for the driver's title going forward. Oscar Piastri has been the most compliant person here, saying all that I wanted for them was to just ask me. And if they asked me, I'd have done it. He's a very reasonable and very mature young man, Oscar Piastri. I will credit him that. And then it was Lando who kind of talked the whole thing down again by saying, no. If Piastri's in front and he's in the lead and he's worthy of the win, I'm going to let him keep the win. And you fucked it.
As he should have. As he should have in this instance. If then he somehow arranged a position swap, given the way the race played out like this, it would have been shambolic.
You mean Hungary? When they literally did that?
Yeah.
And it was completely self-inflicted because they're the ones who put Lando ahead by pitting him when they did.
Yeah. Even freaking worse. And I know, once upon a time, this whole team's identity is we're not Ferrari. We don't manipulate our race result. We let our drivers race for the win of their own terms. We are above team orders. That's beneath us.
It's funny how that changes when all of a sudden they've got a reasonable chance of winning both championships.
And not just with both championships, but with a British driver leading the way. Not two, just one.
Yeah, McLaren have brought this upon themselves. Like, there's no other way of getting around it. We all know that their bread is buttered with Lando Norris. He's a huge part of their brand. He's a huge part of their identity. Zach Brown loves him. Lando himself is one of the most Zoomer F1 types we've had, with Quadrant in his own branding and his own trying to take over the internet. We're totally not the Sidemen kind of vibes that he's had for years now. We all know it's Lando's team, and Lando has been the better driver out of the two McLaren guys this season. Oscar Piastri, to his credit, has been close enough to actually make it a headache to implement this, and that's the greatest compliment I can pay to Piastri this year. But McLaren's management being soft is the reason why we're having this dialogue. If you would have just come out in Hungary and just very quietly said, we're favouring Lando, we think we've got a car that can contest the championship, no one complains. Everybody understands. You favoured your lead car and your lead driver, and Norris was 45 points ahead of Piastri at that point in Hungary. And if you genuinely believe you had the best car in F1, which they did at the time, none of this is an issue. Instead, they've gone back and forth, and now they've half-hearted this. And now whatever they're going to do now going forward between now and the end of the year, they're going to look like goons. And the problem is that Lando finished fourth in this race, a great comeback from where he was on the grid. Verstappen was fifth. They only took 3 points out of Max this weekend. I'd argue it was a net negative because they've lost another race they can chase Max down in. Norris is 59 back with 7 to go.
Well,
this is getting precarious.
The big thing is, as well, is that as we found through a pretty substantial floor redesign this weekend, you wouldn't know it watching Max's race because they screwed his setup in FP3. They opened this weekend guns blazing and then went the wrong way. If Red Bull
we were expecting them to just be like, well, if we were expecting them to be terrible by their standards in the last few rounds, where do you put them on a temporary street course?
Yeah, and
then Sergio Perez had a legitimate shot at the podium, depending on how it for the win. Yeah, it's just strategically didn't work out with the way all the pit stops played out, but he had pace, and Max was reasonably happy with the car up until they made that big swing at the end of FP3, and it just did not work at all. The back of the car was very unruly. If Red Bull are starting to dial out their issues and get back to something resembling their old selves, they don't need a whole lot to make this mathematical equation very, very difficult for McLaren. And if McLaren end up losing this championship on points that they could have scored if they were more ham-fisted with their team orders and just rip the bandage off, they're going to look like idiots. They're going to get clowned forever.
Look, absolutely. Unfortunately, Formula One fans are very fickle people and are very much a what have you done for us lately kind of audience. The damage was done when McLaren's car was relatively cheeks for the first 5 rounds of this year, far more than anything they could have atoned via team orders. But unfortunately, because they've made their lack of or half-hearted attempt at team orders a huge part of this botched Drivers' Championship campaign push, whatever you want to call it, people are going to zone in on that.
Well, Dre, it all adds up.
It absolutely adds up. And I've been the first person to call this out. When we sat down for Hungary, I was the first person to say, you better not lose that driver's title by less than 6. Otherwise, we're gonna be circling that race on the calendar right there. And they've only added a couple of extra red circles to that calendar since that race weekend happened back in June. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, I think the damage was done 5 rounds in when McLaren had to wait for their B-spec car to drop again. Because obviously, ever since Miami, they've been the McLaren that we generally think has probably had the best car in F1, or certainly a viable contender for the number 1 best car in F1. Those 5 rounds to start the year where Max won 6 out of the first 7 is going to come back to bite McLaren hard when it's all said and done when it comes to a driver's campaign. But they've not been operationally a good team this year. They've left so much on the table this year. And yes, Piastri won this race, and yeah, they were unlucky with Lando in qualifying, but that's why you get your run in early in Baku, because there's always a risk at the end of qualifying that someone's going to overdo it.
And you need to have safety margin in the championship as well, where if you're if we look back and it's this series of mistakes, because the Red Bull has been cheeks for the last 2 months, and they've been getting the most out of it while they try to figure out where they went wrong. Ironically, early 2023 in Barcelona. Yeah, you know it because Max lost one race for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, dog, it's crazy. They didn't listen because, just like most of us, we're just thinking, oh, what does Sergio Perez know? He's struggling to get out of Q2 in that rocket ship of his car. What does he know about car development? And then look where they are now.
You may have had a point.
Max was frying this field like Popeye's chicken.
Yeah, and it's understandable when Max has been that good, and Max ultimately won, 19 Grand Prix last year? Why would you question the development of the car when your lead driver is smacking the rest of the field?
Having the greatest individual season in Formula One history. This is also a point that Max Verstappen is not an Adrian Newey merchant.
Yeah,
but
he's him.
But to that effect, if Red Bull begin to cure their issues, and it looks like they're starting on that path, McLaren will have needed to have gotten every point that they had on the table, and they just haven't this year.
Yeah, they're a team that was not ready to contend for. They were not ready to win this quickly.
I would argue with McLaren's resources and operations and the way they were building up and the way they were pretty damn good at the end of last season, they probably should have been at least thinking about it.
Well, the way I look at it is that if you drop this car in the lap of a couple of teams, they're putting boots to asses as a matter of fact.
If you give Mercedes at McLaren from the top of this year,
they're running the field over.
They're running the field over because they are an operationally far better. And the Mercedes have not been great the last couple of years.
The last couple of years, and by any means, even better than McLaren have.
I'd have far more faith in them winning a championship with that as a package, because they've had a far worse car and they've still won 3 Grand Prix this year.
I find it very funny that this episode, this was another episode of George Russell gets a podium by doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah, should we talk about the horrible violence that we saw when Sergio Perez, that monster, pushed Carlos Sainz's head back after their collision and then talked it out after the race, because that's what, professional drivers do. So George Russell picks up the podium off all this. What do we think of the accident itself? Because, that's a shitter for both drivers. Could have had Ferraris on the podium. Could have been Sergio Perez's best day in God knows how long. When he really needs a good result.
I can't believe I'm going to say what I'm about to say here. I praise Neil Wittich. I think he got the explanation in the steward's report absolutely spot on. I think he was absolutely on the money where he said both men could have done more to avoid the incident. And I agree with him that neither party was predominantly to blame. And I'm glad they just left it as it was. I think Carlos Sainz was silly in the first place by trying to go around the outside of his teammate at turn 2. That was a move that was never on. All it ended up doing was just compromising his exit and opening the door for Sergio Perez to counterattack him. And as Wittich proved in the steward's report, Sainz did not take his usual racing line in that particular lap. He's deliberately tried to box Checo in. However, on the other side of the coin, Checo had a lot of track he still could have played with on the left-hand side of the track. He had far more closing speed with DRS open. He was going to make that move stick if he just commits to the left-hand side of the track more, and he likely finishes third. Maybe even second with the way Leclerc's car was tailing off towards the end of that race. His rear tyres are absolutely gone by the end of that race. In my opinion, both men were silly in the way they approached that penultimate lap clash, and it's a shame because I echo Cam's sentiment from earlier. This was, in my opinion, Sergio Perez's best weekend all year.
It's the first one where he wasn't actively horrible since China.
He was just genuinely better than Max pretty much all weekend. Once we got to the serious stuff, he out-qualified him. Yes, he got a bit of a help of a toe on the final run, but even then, Perez was quicker.
It wouldn't have mattered. And they went two opposite directions on setup. Perez's was good, and he made the most of it up until that collision. And Max just out to lunch pretty much for all the sessions that you actually care about.
Yeah, it's a damn shame because Perez was genuinely great this weekend and he was in contention for the win. If he's able to find a way around Norris and maybe can beat Charles Leclerc up with the extra top speed that Red Bull's got, I think Perez has a genuine shot at the win. And yeah, the worst place you want to be is the third man in a DRS train. We all know that's impossible for you to work with. We saw it with Oscar Piastri back in Spa. That's the worst place you want to be. You don't want to be the number 3 guy in a train because there's nothing you can really do about it. It's a damn shame for him. It's a damn shame for Carlos Sainz, who was nowhere in his first stint, but came back, drove very well in the second stint to close in on that leading group and put himself in contention. And they both leave with nothing. It particularly hurts Ferrari, who would have likely had 2 cars on the podium and could have genuinely taken some change out of their disadvantage to McLaren in the constructors and turn it into more of a genuine freeway fight. It still is, do not get me wrong, but it was another missed opportunity for the prancing Hans. And Checo, just when he was starting to silence some of these doubters about whether he should still be in F1 or not, because I think he's been fine since the summer break, this was a genuinely good weekend and he has nothing to show for it. It's really unfortunate.
What he has to show for it is being in the standings where people say he is, the 8th best driver out of all the drivers inside the top 8 seats.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, and I expect better from 2 experienced veteran drivers. I mean, Carlos Sainz turned 30 this weekend. Sergio Perez has had over a decade in F1. This is not something you'd expect from 2 generally pretty clean drivers. They haven't got reputations of being crash merchants. I know Sainz was a bit sloppy this weekend in terms of like using a lot of the escape roads for getting his braking right, but he's not a dirty driver.
That was just about everyone in the practice sessions.
Yeah, because the track was dirty as shit. It was dirtier than a Christina Aguilera music video. It was wild.
Circus, Christ. That was dirtier than a Shannon Sharp IG Live.
Whoa! Hi-oh!
You didn't see anything, but you did hear the sounds of a Hall of Fame football player sounding like he had just run a go route on 3rd and 23 and taken it to the house and needed oxygen immediately.
I just love on his YouTube live later, Ocho's just like, Shan, we got to work on your cardio.
That much was apparent. That much was absolutely apparent.
Just too busy. This happens when you start podcasting for years at a time. Eventually, you just run out. You just run out of shit. I mean, I can't talk after a man with 500 plus podcast appearances on this show alone. It all just goes to shit afterwards. Just like that.
Worst thing you can be in this world is a podcaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But, it's tough being a rookie, too, but you wouldn't know that from the end results of this Grand Prix because Ollie Behrman, of course, standing in for the banned, punished, tarnished Kevin Magnussen at Haas, because of that late crash, he snuck into the points in 10th place on his debut for Haas, out-qualifying and beating Nico Hülkenberg over the line. And the other big story, Franco Colapinto in just his second Grand Prix for Williams finished 8th. And with Alex Albon in 7th, that is a fantastic day at the office for Williams. So that's impressive. How impressive are these rookies doing? More importantly, because we know Behrman will be there next year. Should Franco Colapinto be on the grid next year?
I worry it may be too late. I mean, it looks like since I wrote that script, there seems to be the general assertion that if Audi wants to go sign him, Williams will not stand in his way. And I don't see why anybody wouldn't. It seems to me that there's now a 2, maybe 3 horse race for what we think may be the last seat on the grid for 2025, and that's the second Audi alongside Hulkenberg. Either Valtteri...
Well, it's not the second Audi in 2025. It's basically like the poison chalice, and if you do well, maybe you get considered for Audi.
The bogey green stake of the last year, we call it a Sauber, as we know it.
Tribute F1 team.
Exactly.
The way that thing's been driving.
And it's seemingly it's either going to be a 3-horse race between keeping Valtteri Bottas. Apparently, Gabriel Bortoleto has shot up in people's estimations in the last month or so because he's now the hot name being associated with it. With McLaren, again, have openly said, we're not going to stand in Bortoleto's way if another team offers him a seat. Because, well, McLaren made their bed with Piastri and Norris, and understandably so. Bortoleto
worked out quite well for them.
Yeah, but it has indeed. And Bortoleto is now F2 championship leader after Isaac Hadjar's terrible, awful, horrible, no good Baku weekend. Bortoletto's now leading the championship in F2 and has now got a genuine shot of doing the F2, F3 double back-to-back over for Invicta. So he's now the hot name that's been mentioned, and now people are talking about Franco Colapinto potentially going there as well because he's been so impressive in his first 2 races for Williams. Great day for Williams. They needed that one bad. 10 points on the board with Albon.
Best weekend of the year, and it ain't even close.
Huge weekend for Williams. They're back in the race for 6th place. If they can keep that going and find a couple more tracks they can do that at, who knows? Williams, they tend to score their points in bunches, and if they can do that a couple more times, who knows? Like passing RB and not a million miles away.
Not sure about Singapore, but yeah, I'm looking at this right now. Team Faenza on 34, Haas on 29, Williams on 16, and Alpine on 13.
To that effect, Team Faenza, what has happened? They have been appalling the last 3 or 4 races.
1 point in the last 4 rounds. But we'll come back to that in a minute.
Because it was like, I'm glad that like people are coming around to Franco Colapinto. I'm glad people realize that like F2 results aren't everything. And if we're going to send that charity to Andrea Kimi Antonelli and Oliver Behrman, would not make sense to send that to charity to Franco Colapinto. And also, before everybody brings up Nick de Vries, that was one race with Nicholas Latifi as the benchmark. Colapinto is doing this in multiple races with Alex Albon as his benchmark. And he's in an interesting situation because, like, you have to think Sauber should at least consider him. And by all accounts it is. But, like, let's say they don't. Colapinto's at least got the luxury of coming back to try and make another run at the F2 title if he wants to. Or there are other options for him.
Whack, maybe? Because
get ready to learn
status.
Get ready to learn customer 963, buddy.
I was going to say, because like IndyCar hasn't got an awful lot left on the table. We now know Callum Ilot's confirmed that Prima, very likely Robert Schwartzman will be the other name announced alongside him. I mean, I'm frustrated at Valve to an extent, and this is not necessarily directly his fault. This is F1 academies are just bleeding young drivers of their cash, because if you had Franco Colapinto this entire time, why the hell did you give Logan Sargent a second year and then go after Carlos Sainz? Because this kid looks really, really good. Like,
I can
really
answer your
solid.
second question immediately, because if you have the chance to sign a multiple Grand Prix winner who wants to come to your team, you do it.
Did he want to go to Williams? Really? It was the best option available.
I would say he looked into he walked into the Audi base with a pizza, saw the floor on fire, and walked out.
It's like, James, you're not going to believe this shit.
Let's book a hotel together and talk over the finer details.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity to sign Carlos, you go get Carlos.
You go get him. Look, I'm not stupid, but it's unfortunate that they had. It's unfortunate they had somebody this good in reserve, ready to go, and it took 15 races for them to move on from Logan Sargent in a second year he arguably didn't deserve in the first place.
It's because none of the timeline is really lined up well for Colapinto to benefit all that much from this, other than getting this audition and then seeing what teams think of him. If he keeps doing what he's been doing, I'd think about signing him to my team.
Yeah, it's frustrating because, I know as a reserve driver, he's mostly just sitting around as a pit bull ornament, but at least it keeps him in the paddock and he doesn't have to subject himself to another year of F2's bad quality control. God, I hope they get that fixed next year, if not sooner.
Yeah, I would like to put in a petition to take every Formula 2 powertrain and drop it to the bottom of the ocean.
Fair. I second this notion.
How many start line crashes are we going to have from clutch failure before we realize, maybe we should address this?
Although, to be fair,
we can't have anti-stall on there because learning how to not stall the car is a skill. And if we have anti-stall, that means we're not teaching these drivers skills.
Is that why Kushmani botched it so bad he was actually deemed responsible for that huge red flag causing wreck in the feature race?
It's just silly. At least we could assure ourselves that, hey, despite all the powertrain irregularities, we found a scenario where Niels Coolin cannot succeed. By the way, shout out Niels Coolin. It only lasted a couple weeks, but he at least proved Bill Murray's old tweet correct that, yes, we should put average people in Olympic events for reference. But back to Colapinto, he's done outstanding. He's done better than what the results on his Wikipedia page before then showed. And if nothing else, he at least seems charming and personable and likable. And he's doing the primary assignment right, which was you're not asking him to score points at Williams every race. You are just asking him to get closer to Alex Albon's benchmark than Logan Sargent or Nicholas Latifi were before him.
And he's doing that.
Thus far, he's done that emphatically. And, he did crash in Baku, but at least he didn't crash in a straight line in a brand new car covered in fresh parts.
Whoops.
It's tough for him, man. I hope he finds something. I hope he can stick around this Formula 1 paddock. It's just, the timing's not looking good. And I'm debating, I can come back to Formula 2 and mount a title push if I want to. I can go look to see what other competitive rides are in other series, but even by this point, those options have other people that they're considering, if not already signed. And plus, that takes you out of the paddock where there's no guarantee of getting back. Just ask Mick Schumacher.
Yeah.
Who exclusively cooked over in the WEC weekend over in Fuji. And, I'd like to think that the people who said that he was going to be a liability over at the Alpine WEC team were punching air.
Yeah, and I'm not even under any illusions that he's the best driver in that outfit because Charles Malaysia has been outstanding in the other Alpine, but
phenomenally good.
Mick's been fine. Mick's been perfectly fine in that setup.
I'd argue, I would stick my nug and say he's probably been their second best driver thus far in a program that is very young and still has the consistent issue of valves occasionally getting too friendly with pistons.
Podium, though.
I was literally sat down this morning with Autosports, my colleague Gary Watkins, who's been a sports car staple journalist for longer than I've been alive. And he talked about Charles. He pushed for him last year to be on the Autosports Top 50, the list I can no longer talk about on this podcast. Apparently he's going to do the same
again this year.
Why? Hey, congratulations, by the way, on passing the initial phase-in portion, by the way. Good job, man.
Yes. Hey. Yeah, I'm no longer on probation. I am actually now officially part of Autosport, and they're not going to cut out the floor from underneath me. Probably.
He's part of the establishment, Cam. He's too cool for us.
That's all right. This is going to be the only time I mention the Fuji WEC race, but I feel great.
Oh, I can't
feel
imagine
really
why.
Fucking good after that race.
Oh yeah, number 5.
You have both titles showed up because the feature car won and Kamui Kobayashi decided I'm a geek.
35-point lead with 39 left on the table. Oh no, what a problem to have. Dear, you smug bastard. Anyway, that'll just about do it for this F1 episode. We have one more race in F1 this weekend for the Singapore Grand Prix. Could be very interesting to see how Red Bull turns out in that weekend compared to given the hellscape that was Red Bull there in 2023.
It was so bad they didn't even win the race.
I know, it was terrible. So the one weekend they didn't win all year. It's a shameful display. If I had the SoundCloud for it, I would put the shameful display sound effect in there. But yeah, it was. It was going to be fascinating to see how they turn out in Singapore this weekend. Going back to the old layout as well. Last race before F1 takes a 4-week autumn break, I suppose, I guess is the way of putting it. They'll be off for a month before they come back for the United States Grand Prix at Austin in the end of October. So again, we'll be taking there'll be a small F1 break again for some weird reason. We'll talk about that later on in next week's show. Just 7 rounds to go now in Formula One this year for Verstappen, still with a 59-point lead in the driver's standings. It's getting a bit tetchy now, McLaren. Just saying.
Even with the 3 sprints to supplement it, it's not as done deal like you think it is.
I don't even put too much into the sprints right now because it's only 1 point per position. So we'll have to wait and see how Red Bull fares at Singapore. If Red Bull get their shit together in Singapore, it could be championship over before we even realising it. Because if they get it together there where they were awful last year, relatively speaking, it's going to be Vince Carter levels of finished. Next time out, we'll be talking about IndyCar in Nashville. If you watch on the other side, we've already got Alex Palou tribute statuses for 2/3 of this call. I can't particularly imagine why, as we talk about how Will Power's title campaign suddenly became unfastened, metaphorically and literally. Until then, I've been Dre Harrison, they've been Cam Buckley and RJ O'Connell. Until next time, we've got chills, they're multiplying. Sayonara.
It's time for RB to turn their jorts back into jants.
Ugh.
The last thing I needed to wake up to today, besides the last ever Woj bomb, was a Formula One car.
They didn't choose a double denim, Cam. The double denim chose them.